All right, excellent. It looks like we're live. Let me just double check this. If anyone can confirm that. Great. Yeah, so we are live then. And for everyone who's there, my name's Dennison Bertrand. I'm developer advocate at Zeppelin. And this is, to be named Zeppelin Talk Show. We're speaking today with Yoav Weiss from Tabookey about the Gas Stations Alliance, meta transactions, 1-800 Ethereum, and that sort of thing. This is meant to be sort of an easy conversation flow. So developers talking to developers, more high level. I don't expect that we'll get into anything too technical depth. It's mainly intended to be an open conversation for people to participate in and sort of get questions answered and sort of like humanize the entire process that goes on in the development community. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Yoav.
Hi. Yeah. So I'm Yoav Weiss. I'm a CTO at Tabookey. Tabookey is a new cyber insurance platform that is using the blockchain to connect human intentions to results in an insurable way. But today we're going to talk about not about our business, but about the gas station network that we've developed, and we are now pushing together with Zeppelin to get to mainnet. So
gas station network, 1-800 Ethereum. I think not everyone is so familiar with this. You had a great post on Medium called 1-800 Ethereum. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the thought process behind it, why you chose the name 1-800 Ethereum, which I particularly love, and what problems you're trying to solve?
Sure. So so I'll elaborate a bit about the problem, and then it will become apparent why it's actually an 800 number for smart contracts. So the problem we're trying to solve is that of user onboarding. You know that user onboarding for Ethereum, user onboarding for dApps is broken right now. It's very hard for new users to join the ecosystem, so it doesn't really grow beyond early adopters. The process of starting to use the dApp, let's say you just want to start using some dApp. So you have to go to an exchange, pass KYC process, then transfer money from your bank to this exchange, then install MetaMask in your browser, transfer money from the exchange to, and all that process just before you can even start using the dApp. And that doesn't make sense. So we need to solve user onboarding in a way that doesn't require owning Ether. Otherwise, Ethereum will remain a geek-only territory and never reach mass adoption. So that's a problem that we wanted to solve, and it was already solved to some extent using meta transactions. Well, meta transaction is a solution that allows you to put a relay server in front of your dApp, have your users communicate with it. So the user creates a transaction, then a gasless transaction because it doesn't have Ether, then sign the transaction and give it to this relay server. Now the relay signs it as a wrapped transaction, as a meta transaction with gas. The relay does have Ether, so the relay puts it on chain, and that's how the transaction gets to the blockchain. But the problem with this approach is that it was very centralized, so we couldn't rely on that, and I don't think that the community should rely on anything that is so centralized. And because up until now, you could use, if you don't need a relay, then your dApp, your trust base is a smart contract that anyone can read and verify. But once you introduce this component, this relay, suddenly you have this single point of failure where if this relay goes down, even if you have more than one, but it's still a small number. So if your relays go down, then your dApp becomes unavailable, which means that an attacker could do a denial of service attack and take a dApp down. Or even worse, since it becomes a part of the trust base because it can actually censor transactions selectively, it means that now part of your trust base requires blind trust. Nobody knows what's going on inside the relay. It's not on chain. So now you are open to attacks, for example, favoring one user over the other, and users have no way to verify that this is not the case. So this is a problem that we are trying to solve. We wanted meta transactions, but trustless and decentralized. And then we figured out the solution. What the solution really needs to be is a way for the DApp, a way for smart contracts to pay for their users, to pay for the gas, so users never have to. And then either you charge the user, you can charge the user by other means, such as a fiat, a credit card, or whatever makes sense in your business model, or you can just sponsor your users and pay for user acquisitions, which is what's going on in Web 2. So we want Web 3 to be as easy as Web 2, which means that we need to be able to pay for user acquisition and acquire users as easily as with Web 2. And the way to do that is to create this 1-800 or collect call mechanism, which allows any smart contract to receive calls, decide whether it wants to pay for them, and whether it wants to pay for them and accept them. So now any user without Ether can start using the DApp, and I expect that this will increase the adoption of dApps by orders of magnitude. So great. That's the story behind it.
Great. There's a lot to unpack there. So this sounds great. Certainly here at Zeppelin, we're really excited about this and the technology to help solve the user onboarding problems that we have currently. One of the interesting things I think to like piece apart the sort of total solution is there's an aspect which are the meta transactions, right? And that's the idea that someone else is going to pay the gas for users, at least in the initial portion of the onboarding process, so that they don't need Ether to get started. But then there's also the idea of decentralizing the relayers, right? Because originally the idea is that with meta transactions, there's just some relay that pays your gas fees, but that's a centralized solution, right? So what you're talking about here is creating a way that this solution actually becomes decentralized. It also becomes something that the dApp providers, if someone's just creating a dApp, they don't necessarily have to also run the relay infrastructure, right? They just set aside money that they want to use for customer acquisition, and someone else can take care of that. So now you can create applications that perhaps run, where all the code runs from something like IPFS, and there isn't actually a server anywhere. It's just a front-end application, but you still can take advantage of meta transactions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we realized that what Ethereum needs in order to support this is a new piece of infrastructure, which provides decentralized meta transactions, and then anyone should be able to start using it. You shouldn't have to do anything. You shouldn't have to maintain your own server. But in order to do this, these relay servers need to be trustless and incentivized. You need to incentivize people to run relays so that we'll have many of those, and we can't have them trusted because anyone can add another relay to the network. So with that in mind, we started looking into the problem and figure out how could we decentralize it and make it trustless. We knew that we wanted dApp to pay for its own users and then maybe charge by other means which are outside the scope of the gas station network. And the way we chose to implement it is by creating a singleton central smart contract, which we call Relay Hub. This is a smart contract that everyone can read and verify. It's the only trusted component in the system, and when a new relay is launched, it announces itself by registering at Relay Hub. So it sends a registration transaction to Relay Hub, says that this is my URL, this is how users can reach my relay, and then this is the transaction fee I expect to get paid. The transaction fee is a percentage on top of the actual gas fee of the transaction. So let's say a relay says it wants 20%. It means that it will get compensated for the actual cost of the transaction plus 20% for its profit. So the relay registers itself with the relay hub. Let it pass for a second.
Sorry, that's probably me. So.
Okay. So. Okay. So you have the relay registers with relay hub announces a few parameters. Among them are its fee and its URL and its Ethereum address, and then this relay becomes available because now anyone can look at the events emitted from relay hub and get a list of fresh relays. So now now let's say a client application wants to send a transaction, a gasless transaction. So what it does, it creates the transaction just like it would normally. It signs the transaction, and then it sends it to the relay. It selects a relay from relay hub based on the availability and fee, and it sends the transaction to this relay. So now the relay is and it also signs a message saying that it's willing to pay the fee for this relay, of course. So now what the relay does is it looks at the transaction. It also looks at the destination contract and checks with it as a view function. Checks it. It can check offline whether this transaction will be paid for, whether the contract is willing to accept this transaction for that user. If it does, then the relay is going to sign the transaction and send it to the contract, and also return it signed to the user, so the user can verify immediately that the service has been rendered, that the transaction looks good, that it is properly funded, the relay properly funded. Basically, that the transaction is going to get mined. So if the transaction doesn't look good, or the relay doesn't respond, you never have to wait. The user never have to wait for mining to realize that, because that would be a disaster. Then a small number of non-functioning relays would make the system unusable. But here, since you get the reply immediately, without waiting for anything to happen on the blockchain, you can just, so if you don't get a reply within, say, 2 seconds, just drop the connection, move to the next relay in the list. And that's how it is centralized. It's trustless because you don't need to trust the relay. The relay does exactly what you tell it to after you agree to pay the fee. And it's decentralized because even though you are talking to a single relay at a time, you have the full list of relays and you can quickly switch between them. And then a lot of the design work here went into the game theory of the system, making sure that relays are properly incentivized to play fair. They are also very strongly disincentivized for misbehaving. If a relay has to place a stake when it registers, so and if a relay is misbehaving and trying to do any denial of service on the user's transaction, then it is actually provable on chain. So other relays can look at the transaction. They can see that there's a denial of service going on by one relay, and they can prove it to Relay Hub and slash the stake of the offending relay. So relays are actually incentivized to keep each other honest. So that's basically how the Relay Hub system works.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. One of the first examples of this that we've seen that have really been successful kind of right out of the gate is Austin Griffith's burner wallet, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. This is so Austin's burner wallet is I think it's one of the coolest applications out there, and we've seen how it was used with the food trucks at East Denver, so it was really great. And Burner Wallet used to have a single relay. Austin Griffith implemented meta transactions. I think actually he may have been the first one to implement meta transactions into a project, and it worked really great. But it was a centralized relay. He had a single relay, and since we really like Burner Wallet, so the team here at Tabookey implemented the gas station network into Burner Wallet and sent Austin a pull request, which he accepted. So shortly before East Denver, he switched to using the gas station network, which we deployed on the XDAI network. That's where Burner Wallet lives. So now when you send a link to someone with no XDAI and you want to pay in XDAI, you're actually going through the gas station network.
That's great. I mean, something that's so interesting when we talk about solving user onboarding, it really goes a long way to speak to the power of meta transactions. That kind of the first application to use it is sort of instantly, a hit, certainly within like the scope of what we consider a hit in Ethereum land, right? Like it was used immediately by a large number of people. They had like stats after ETH Denver about how many people were on it. Thousands of dollars went through it, thousands of times it was used in real life, and it was just like smooth as butter. So it really speaks, I think, to the power of like meta transactions to like solve these problems or address these user onboarding problems when we immediately see it functioning. So going forward, then, could you imagine, for example, a scenario where the gas station's network actually perhaps replaces the need for users to use Web3 wallets in their browsers completely? Could you imagine, for example, maybe the crypto bank of the future actually pays all your gas for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on the model. If you don't have to use a wallet. You can use a wallet, but you can also use it. You can also do everything in browser. It depends on what kind of asset you're controlling with it. And if you're controlling, if you are using it to control something very valuable, you might still want to use a wallet in order to connect to a hardware like the Ledger Nano S. But if you're just interacting with a dApp, say playing a game or anything that doesn't require that kind of security, it would make sense to use a browser. And in fact, even once we integrate it with an identity solution, which is part of the roadmap here, then you can really keep the keys in the browser, because it doesn't matter if you lose the key, because you'll have a recovery mechanism for your identity, so you'll be able to switch to a new computer and then regain access to your identity. Once we have that, then there's really no need to have a browser, to have a Web3 wallet attached to your browser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. By eliminating the Web3 browser or the Web3 sort of like plugin for your browser, you can really instantly access so many more potential users, because it's really an upscale. I was speaking with someone just the other night about this, how there's this proliferation, especially on mobile, of Web3 enabled browsers, right? But we want to be focusing on the Ethereum experience, not a new browser war, right? So we want tools to be useful for people today, right now.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's what we're trying to enable. But you could also use it. Let's say you are maintaining a wallet. You could actually make your wallet profitable this way. So one way you could use the gas station network is to reduce the need for a wallet for your own dApp. But another way is if you're a wallet and you want your users to be able to interact with any dApp without Ether, you could sponsor the gas this way to your users. You don't actually give them Ether. You are sponsoring the transaction for them through your own system, and then through the gas station network. So you could have a profitable wallet by providing this kind of service. This is something that I recently suggested as a reply to Vitalik's tweet. Vitalik was suggesting that in order to encourage the development of wallets and clients, we should give them. Any user should give them voluntarily a small fee of 1 GUI in order to keep them funded. And I think that this is a charity model, and we should only resort to charity when there's absolutely no other way. But for wallets, there is. It's if a wallet could make it so much easier for its users, especially for new users, to start using it and to start interacting with dApps, then it's worth a lot of money. And in fact, for the user, it doesn't even cost more. If the user has to pay for a wallet, let's say the user needs to pay a fee to use the wallet, and then he doesn't need to buy ETH. But otherwise, it's not just the annoyance of going to an exchange. You also pay fees to the exchange. So user onboarding currently costs the user money and inconvenience. Let's say we make it just money without the inconvenience. Instead of paying an exchange for onboarding, you use the exchange only for trading. If you're not a trader, you don't need to know about exchanges. You pay your wallet instead, exactly the same fees that you would have paid an exchange. So that's another thing that you could do with the gas station network. You could shift the user cost from exchange to wallet, and then have better user experience and encourage the ecosystem to develop better wallets and better user experience.
Exactly. So we have a question from the audience here, from Scott Stevenson. Question: if I want to supply my users with Relay/wallets, but using my own tokens, not XDAI, is the implementation the same as Austin did with Burner Wallet?
Yes, the implementation would be the same. It's if you look at the standard we're trying to create, the EAP 1613, you'll see that your contract actually gets 3 calls. You get during the transaction, you get 3 calls. The first one is a view function where you get asked whether you are willing to pay for the transaction. The second one is the actual transaction, and then the third one, still at the end of the same transaction, is a call that tells you how much the transaction ended up costing you and how much from your deposit is going to go to compensate the relay. So now you could implement inside this function call, you can implement charging your user with your own token. So let's say you are a smart contract that implements an ERC20 token, say DAI, and you want DAI, and you want your users to only use DAI. You don't want them to hold Ether. So now the DAI contract gets the information about how much the transaction for that user ended up costing, and then charge the user from his DAI balance. So you could charge with your own token or implement any model that makes sense for you. And I think that charging by tokens of individual projects will probably become quite the norm here.
So here's a question I have. What about cross-chain burner wallets or cross-chain relays? Right now, I understand it's running mainly on XDAI, but what is the future? Can we have Loom, XDAI, POA, mainnet relays that work on all the chains simultaneously? Can someone be paid on a different chain for their transaction? So the question.
Sure, you can. We definitely expect to see relays, Relay Hub deployed on more networks. Currently, it's deployed only on Ropsten for testing and on XDAI, and soon it's going to be on the Ethereum mainnet. I expect to see it on other networks such as POA and beyond just XDAI. and probably other similar networks. Each relay lives, even if it's connected to multiple networks, it's going to use different addresses on these multiple networks. So a relay can serve one relay can serve many networks, but it doesn't really give you a cross-network charging. For that, you would have to implement another layer. That's certainly a layer we could be thinking about. We are thinking about a few interesting layers to implement on top of the gas station network down the line. So we could consider that. This is not something that we've considered so far.
Okay. Yeah, it certainly would be interesting to have a settlement layer, or perhaps everything's settled on XDAI regardless of the chain that you're on, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
So we only have a couple more minutes here. I wanted to see if anyone at the Zeppelin team has some questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then we can also talk about the standardizing this. This is something that we started discussing.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's actually a really important part of the Gas Stations Alliance. So actually, maybe let's talk a little bit about that first.
Okay. Yeah. So we all realize that standardizing things is important for Ethereum. We don't want to have a fragmented solution. Fragmented where each project implements its own small relay network with its own protocol, which is not going to be as robust. So that's why we wrote the EIP 1613 and the open source implementation. What we're trying to do is to push this into a standard. We want to have it widely adopted. So we created an alliance. We created a gas station network alliance, and we have several partners now. One of them, of course, is Open Zeppelin, and we've been working together on getting it to mainnet. The foundation, the Ethereum Foundation, is also supporting the alliance, and we have a few more partners who are working on it. We hope to see it become the full standard, and then to add some new standards on top of it, such as trustless reading from the blockchain. That's another thing that the alliance is about. It's basically creating a decentralized Infura, a decentralized and a trustless layer where you can also read from the blockchain trustlessly. So these are all things that we try to turn into standards and make it part of the Ethereum infrastructure.
Excellent. We have a question from Santiago.
Okay.
I'll read it for our users. If I understand correctly, you mentioned adding identities to the protocol. Any ideas on what standard you would be implementing or which features would be included?
So we've had some discussions on that, but it's still a bit early. So we haven't committed on any identity standard. That's something we should discuss and also publish probably a Medium post about it. But we'll do that right after we get to mainnet with the base layer.
Excellent. That's very cool. So it's 11, at least here in New York. So that's been our half hour. I want to thank everyone for participating, unless there's any more questions. I think Leo is
I'm saying bye. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks a lot, Denison. This was great.
Yeah, so in that case, we'll wrap up. Bye. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Yoav, for your time explaining all of this. We'll be sharing this video wider so people can see it, as more people than could make it this morning can see it as well. We're really excited for the Gas Stations Alliance and what's coming next with Meta Transactions. It's really going to be an exciting time for user onboarding and taking Ethereum to the next level. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And take care.